And we are live here at Jazz TV show with our own Kirk Stafford from the PM Coach. Kirk, welcome on the TV show.
Jazz, thanks very much. Thanks. I'm really appreciative of the invitation. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Kirk. Very well, thank you. Obviously, exciting times, exciting market at the moment, and a lot of different changes that have come
Mm-hmm.
in property management in particular that we'll talk about today. And ladies and gentlemen, we are super excited because this is going to be a game changer show. Because Kirk is one of the well regarded and well respected property management coach and a leader and an authority in the industry, supports a lot of real estate offices, a lot of property managers, and has helped a lot of property managers throughout COVID regarding mental health, about the changes in the legislation, and is really supportive of various different companies on Facebook groups and otherwise, and coaches a lot of the best offices in the country. I'd say Kirk is the number one trainer in property management.
Very kind of you. Thanks so much, Jazz.
No, it's really, really, really our pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for your time, Kirk. And I guess today's conversation and our live or TV show is all about how do landlords or rental providers, now they call them, avoid costly mistakes that they sometimes come across or perhaps encounter. And obviously, we'll talk about a few of the other discussion points. Kirk, tell us a little bit more about yourself, please.
All right. Okay. Look, I've been in the industry since the 1980s. I started off in 1984 selling property, what we'd now call a sales cadet or a sales PA, and cut my teeth in, of all places, then Frankston, which is across the other side of Port Phillip Bay from where you are. And spent 8 or 9 years running around selling, managing teams, managing offices. And during the recession, I worked out that I was a better property manager than I was a salesperson.
Right.
In fact, I was unkindly called by one tribunal member, because they were then the Residential Tenancies Tribunal. I was unkindly called a refugee from sales. Right. So we had. I still actually speak to that particular member on a social basis. We still have a bit of a chuckle about that. I've been in the property management sector now for about 30 years. I've done everything from hands-on property management work. I mean, obviously, I cut my teeth down in that Frankston area when things were a bit tough. So I'm used to having fairly robust conversations with people about their late rent, or about their repairs, or about adjusting the rents on their properties to suit the market. But I've also gone on, run my own businesses, run businesses for other people. I'm now well into another phase, which is the property management coach, which you said before. And I spend my time consulting to companies, not just in Melbourne, but also interstate. I do a lot of training of property managers around the country. In Melbourne and Victoria, pardon me, I talk a lot about legislation. In other areas, I'll talk a lot more about the human skills, the mindset, communication, negotiation, and those sorts of things, because obviously housing is, from a legislation point of view, a state issue. So each state's got its own legislation. I can't be across all of them. So, I've sort of broadened my horizons in terms of what I talk about to encompass areas which are probably just as important to property managers and also to rental providers and renters, like communication, like being able to talk to people properly and use language that's appropriate, but also still get your message across.
Correct. Exactly.
Things like, try to instill some negotiation skills in people and try to give them the right mindset around what they're doing, so that they're not going into every conversation as though it's the end of the world. Exactly. Because we all tend to over-awfulize those conversations.
100%. And I guess a lot of people know what they need to do, and what they say is, you know what to do, but do you do what you know?
Yeah, that's right. And I think also, we're probably going to get into this a little bit more detail later, but property managers, and I've had a lot of conversations recently with very senior property managers, but also, well, junior ones as well. And we all say the same thing. Property managers by nature are nurturers, they're empaths, and they want to solve problems. But the problem is they take on the problem as their own, and they lose their objectivity.
Correct.
And by doing so, they become they become a bit more overwrought about it.
Yeah,
and that then
I think it's a choice management sometimes, isn't it?
It is. It can be difficult to separate yourself off from the problem, but
Correct.
a lot of PMs have got to understand that it's they're there to find the solution, not to participate in the problem.
Correct. And of course, navigate the client through the problem and find a solution rather than getting stuck into the problem themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think if they had more adopted that attitude, they'd be able to look for and achieve a solution a lot more quickly. And it wouldn't keep them awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is the time that we should be resting, rather than lying awake staring at the ceiling going, I don't know whether I've solved Mrs. Jones's toilet issue. Because it happens.
That's a common thing in the industry, isn't it?
It is.
Or dreaming about this property's got a burst pipe.
Oh, look, don't.
It happens a lot. Has this invoice been paid, or has this issue been resolved, or dreaming about this issue becoming big? And that's because your subconscious mind is telling you to resolve problems before you leave. Of course, it's not practically possible every time, but I guess if you focus on the outcome, and if you have people like yourself on their side, then they can certainly navigate through the journey quite easily.
That's right. But it's also got to be one issue at a time.
Correct. And Kirk, what's your take on the latest changes? Obviously, they happened in 2021. You've never had a public discussion around it. What's your personal take on the changes? The pendulum, some people would say it was on that side. Now it's completely shifted on this side.
I think, look, Jazz, I think some of the changes are really good. I think we needed to have a set of minimum standards. I think we needed to have a safety audit of the properties from the point of view of the gas safety and electrical safety. I think that even though, and yes, they've added a cost burden to the rental provider.
Correct.
It's the same as in our own homes. We'd want the same sort of standard. But what we've got to understand is that with a rental agreement, it's a contract. So there's a different standard that applies to that contract. Now, this all came out of, I think probably the start of this was probably a Supreme Court case about now 7 years ago, where they found that the age of the property didn't matter. The rent that was being charged didn't matter. The awareness of the tenant or the renter to the issue. You see, I still call them tenants. I'm a bit of a dinosaur.
Much easier.
It's hard to break habits, but the awareness of the renter didn't matter. There was still an entitlement to safe and secure housing.
Correct.
I don't see a problem with it. Other aspects of it, look. Some of them in there I look at and think, gee, did we really have to go through that? I mean, there's now a 5 strikes methodology for applying for possession of a property for rental use. And look, there are other things in there. There's the reasonable proportionate test, which means that the tribunal look at eviction as the absolute last option. But there are also other aspects to it that I think really just tidied things up, because that act was written 25 years ago.
Wow.
That was the initial case. Then there was a review and an amendment done in 2008, and we've just got to sort of keep the legislation moving with the times. electronic means of service of notices or whatever has been contemplated that is now in the Act. Those sorts of things will just make our job a lot easier.
Right, gotcha.
But realistically, from a property manager's point of view, even though there's some changes from the point of the rental provider and the provision of the property and what have you, and the notices, it's really just a matter of making sure that their processes keep up with it. It's really just a matter of making sure that and again, this goes back to what we were saying a minute ago about taking everything on as a problem.
Correct.
The Act was always going to be rewritten. So we've really got to look at it and go, okay, well, it's going to happen. How do we adjust what we do, both in terms of our processes, but our mindset, to take this on? And it's one of the areas. Sorry.
Please, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think the pressure that has put on the property managers, I think that there's a lot of amount of workload that has increased as well with the changes as well, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because there's much more at the back end in terms of management of the compliance aspects. As we were saying before, your gas, your electrical safety, your minimum standards, pardon me, smoke detector servicing, all those things take management at the back end. And I know some of the larger companies have actually brought in compliance managers to take that load off the property manager themselves. I'm talking about reasonably large companies because it was taking so much of their time.
Wow.
Because it's the checks need to be done, the electrical gas safety checks need to be done every second year, smoke alarm checks annually. So all these things add time into the property manager's day. So we've got to try to sort of alleviate that, particularly in an environment where we've lost 35% of the population of property managers over the last 3 years. And in the main, they haven't been replaced.
And that's a big problem in the industry at the moment.
Oh, for sure.
You can't find quality staff.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because all we're doing is we're moving staff from one office to another. Part of that issue is because it's seen now as being a fairly high stress occupation. Certainly not at emergency services levels or anything, or health responders or anything along those lines. But in terms of white to blue collar employment, it's high stress. The bar to entry now has been set at a certificate 4 level, which means that there's additional study. You can't just walk in as I did back in the 80s, just walk basically into an estate agency and say, I want to work in real estate, can you give me a job? Which is pretty much all it was then. I sort of had to fill out a piece of paper saying, yes, I've been a good boy, and here's a copy of my driver's license, so you can go and make sure that I haven't robbed banks recently, or at all.
Welcome on board.
Yeah, well, that's right. But we've had this recognition that there needs to be higher standards of education.
Correct.
But I think that they've probably set the bar too high in that regard. Because you can't work in the industry filling out the functions or performing the functions of a property manager or a real estate salesperson unless you've got the Cert 4. There's no middle ground for someone to come in as a cadet or an intern or a trainee.
Everyone's going to have the same certification.
That's right, yeah. Whereas some of the work that we do, some of the administrative work we do, I don't think is necessarily at the level that it would require that sort of education. And let's face it, a lot of that sort of thing, we're actually offshoring. We're outsourcing to, there are onshoring companies that I'll give you virtual assistants, but there are also offshoring companies in the Philippines, Indonesia, and other parts of and India that you can go to that will perform those functions.
Exactly. And that's a new change, and that's a new norm in the industry right now.
Yeah, that's right. It's got to be.
Some of the companies are providing really good talent to real estate companies in Australia as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's
right, because you're not paying.
That's where our industry standards, or perhaps our level of training in the offices, need to improve as well.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think that it does, because we really need to have and one of the things I had when I was running a fairly large business in Frankston many years ago was I'd bring people in at either a reception or an assistant level and provide them with a career path. Primarily because I could see that the company that I was running, and I had nearly 20 people under me, I could see that I was going to have to turn people over at some stage. They'd leave. I had a couple of the staff went off and had children, and a couple of them, others moved interstate. Very few left for any other reason. And I needed to have that succession plan for people to be able to bring people in. And we need that within offices now, where we have that progression. You can go, and I was chatting to a couple of people the last couple of days, because I'm also recording a podcast session or a series of them, and we were saying, where did you start? They were saying, look, I fell into the industry. I started as an admin assistant, or I came in as a receptionist, or I came in as a salesperson. So there's always been that progression, and we need to, I think, and in the larger companies especially, it's easier, but in the smaller companies it can be a bit of a challenge. We just need to bring people through so that they step through a process of learning the ropes, and they may sit in the back end of the office for, it could be 6 months, it could be longer, before they become client facing. So they know the systems, they know the processes, they know the legislation, and they've had time to develop their communication skills before you give them a portfolio of properties and turn them loose on the unsuspecting public. So we need to train them up. Yeah. But if we could have that within our own structure, within the legislation, it would make our jobs a lot easier, and we would start to then partially resolve this. People have called it the crisis. I don't know whether it's a crisis, but it's certainly a shortage of really good property managers to be able to effectively manage the relationship between the renter and the rental provider.
Exactly. And I think my personal take on this is the industry standards in wages needs to sort of increase and remunerate the staff to a level that they're happy and they are not stressful about the amount of work they do versus the amount of money they receive as well in return. And that also then calls for the property management companies to look at their systems, improve their processes, and perhaps increase their fees as well.
Well, yeah, and look, you're right. It's you've got to have the bottom line in mind, obviously, but it's this is now, if we're talking about a level at Cert 4 as your baseline education requirement, there's very few roles around that would ask for that would be paying less than, and I'm talking broadly in the employment community, that would be paying less than $75,000 or $80,000 a year.
Exactly.
And when you look at what a property manager does in their day, they're worth at least that, if not more.
100%.
The only way you're going to get that, sorry? Yeah.
And I said certainly 100%. And I think apart from the wages or apart from the salary they receive, I think that there needs to be more incentives towards the mindset to send them away to refresh the mind as well. That's really critical.
Yep, look, I agree with you. I think that there's more than salary, but that's where it starts. But you've also got to have if you want to retain staff, you've got to have good culture. You've got to make sure that the people that you're bringing into the company fit the culture of the office and actually add to it, rather than just sliding in. They've got to bring something to the table, and that's one of the things. Yeah, that I'm working on a little bit with at the moment with one of my other industry partners, in terms, partly, of having that personality profiling and that staffing piece as a platform that we can take into offices and then start to say, okay, well, you've got these two personality types over here, but you actually need to round it out a little bit down here and complete the circle. Just make sure that you've got a good mix of people within the office. Exactly. But you're not going to get that unless you're getting your bottom line taken care of as well.
Exactly, and it requires planning and understanding and assessment of your goals, where you want to lead your office as well.
Oh, yeah.
Coming to the question a lot of landlords ask across the industry as well, with the changes about evictions or perhaps gaining access to their properties. I think the question that a lot of people have asked us, and one of the questions came from one of the rental providers who I actually met last week, and obviously a lot of other rental providers we normally speak to on day-to-day basis, is that, or they're managed by another agency, and they call us to verify where obviously the agency is providing them information, and they still want to verify that what about 120 days, no reason notice to vacate, or what are the new changes that have the legislation come in, and how they can gain access or possession of their properties.
Yeah, true. And look, that is a frustration, and that's one of the things I think that we're still grappling with, because it really was something that we used as a management tool only rarely. It was never, it's not as though it was used on a wholesale basis, but where you didn't have any other good reason, but the tenant was obstructive in some way, combative, and it wasn't a good relationship. They weren't a fit for the property, or the property and the landlord for them. That no reason notice was always a good one to have.
Right.
To bring a tenancy to end. I mean, 120 days, that's 4 months. It's not as though we're saying, here's 4 days on your bike. We're saying you've got that amount of time, but let's just call it quits because it's not working. When they removed that, we found that our opportunities for terminating tenancies started to diminish. There is still within the legislation a mechanism where in the first term of the tenancy, that first 12-month or 2-year term, or whatever that first fixed is, you can still serve a notice to vacate when it comes to the end, or when it is coming to the end of that fixed term. Once you get into the second fixed term and it's renewed, no, you can't do that. So if it's not working, you've still got that option available to you, and you'll generally know. It's like, and I've used this analogy before. It's like dating. You know pretty quickly whether he or she is the right person for you. And with tenancy, it's also a matter. You know whether that tenant or that renter is the right person for the property and also for the rental provider. So we can take some action. We've just got to get through to the end of that first fixed term. The other reasons really now are no different to what they were before. They're probably a little bit more stringently applied in certain areas. As I say before, the rental arrears, you've now got 5 strikes, and those 5 strikes have got to be within a year, and then that year is calibrated to the start date of the tenancy. So if a tenant falls behind only 3 times when you serve notice, only 3 times in that first year, well, you've got to start again on the 365th day. So you've got to wait for them to get 5 times. You've got to serve that notice to vacate 5 times. If this is on the basis that they have rectified the rental and it is all paid up, but they've got to serve that 5 times within that. If they don't pay, well, then it's automatically you make your application to vacate. That's right. So it's not as though you've got to go through all 5 strikes and then do it, but that's only on the basis that they not pay it until the absolute last gasp. But if they don't pay it, even on the first notice, pardon me, you can then go to your tribunal application and make the application for the hearing and start to progress things from there. If you're not try to remove them on the basis of rent arrears, you've really got 3 or 4 methods available to you. That is, the home's going to be demolished and something else built in its place. There's going to be major and substantial renovations which would preclude anybody living there while they're being done. The property is going to be sold with vacant possession. The property has been sold with vacant possession, or a member of the landlord's family who would normally be dependent on them. Now, that's an important point. They've got to be at least substantially dependent on them, is moving into the property. Now, each of those 5 that I've just given you has a 60-day notice period to it, 2 months. There is also other accompanying paperwork that needs to go with a couple of them in terms of a statutory declaration, and there's some approved wording on the Consumer Affairs website that needs to go on there as well. But most of the time, a lot of these matters are resolved before they go to hearing at VCAT. But we've got to prepare everything right from the very beginning as though we're on our way to a hearing. So we've got to be prepared for the worst possible outcome.
And that brings another question. Now, you said additional documentation that needs to go with the notice to vacate. That's something critically important. If you can please shed some light, say for an example, the notice is served, perhaps a notice to sell, notice to vacate based on the rental provider selling the property with vacant possession. And the notice goes by itself. And what documentation needs to accompany, or if hypothetically the documentation is not attached or supplied to the renter, what would happen?
You need to supply the documentation to the renter. Okay, I'll make that very clear, because if you solely serve the notice to vacate without the supporting documentation, and as I said before, you basically got to serve that with the view that you're going to VCAT. So you've got to prove that what you're doing is completely above board and there is every intent that the property is going to be sold. You would need to provide the contract of sale. You would need to provide, if it's been sold. If it's only going on to the market, you need to provide the agency authority, plus also some proof that the vendor's paid for the advertising as well. Because not just, anyone can fill out an application as an authority. You also then got to provide the statutory declaration that says that although it's mainly for owners moving in, but it can be used in this situation as well, because you need to acknowledge that there is an embargo on the property being released for a period of 6 months from the date that notice is served.
That's a long time, isn't it?
It can be a very long time. Look, if you're selling in this market, yes, it might take a bit longer, but it certainly is still not going to take 6 months. But that only applies to that particular owner. If the property is sold and it was sold to another investor, and that investor decides that they're going to lease it out, and settlements at the end of, say, month 4, for example, that property can be leased out straight away because it's changed hands. It's a different ownership.
Correct. And now tell us a little bit more about the Consumer Affairs deeming a property non-compliant. So is there a defect in the property? Because if the rental provider decides to sell and couldn't sell within a month, or decides to release it back again after a month and a half or 2 months of trying to sell the property, the Consumer Affairs suggests that the property would be non-compliant for 6 months.
No, I'm not sure where that's come from. But what would happen is that if it was still the same owner, and you'd have to then go back to VCAT, you'd have to apply to VCAT for a hearing for that embargo to be lifted. Now, and look, I think at that stage, and in a market that we're in at the moment where you're not getting the prices you were, say, 6, 8, 12 months ago, some people can have the view that, well, we're only going to sell, you and I have come across this many times, I'm only going to sell my property if I get X figure. But if the market's at Y here and you're after X, well, then there's a gap that you're going to find hard to get. So you've got to be realistic about your opportunities there. But if you decide after, say, 5 or 6 or 8 weeks or whatever it is, no, look, I'm not going to sell it now, I've got to hold on to it. First thing I'd be doing is I'd be going to the tenant, even if they've moved out of the property. I'd be going to the tenant and saying, can we get your consent to release the property? Because that's really where it starts. I would still also be applying for a hearing at VCAT, even with that consent, if it was given. If it wasn't given, would you be? And look, there are some people who tend to get a little bit obstructive at that stage, and they'll say, no, look, you go jump in the lake. But you would then go to VCAT and say, well, look, we've made efforts with the renter or the former renter to get them to agree to this. it wasn't, the notice was served purely for the sale. It wasn't for any other reason, because that is sometimes going to be asked, or probably quite often. And VCAT will, in the majority of cases, give that consent or lift the embargo on the reletting. They're not unreasonable in that regard. And look, I think from a sector point of view, we've got a view of VCAT being very heavily in favour of the renter, and yes, they can be, and I've certainly experienced that firsthand. But it's also the case that they're there to try to adjudicate a matter that is going to be highly charged emotionally anyway.
Correct.
And I wouldn't want to be a VCAT member. I'll say that. I've thought about it. I really have, after some of the decisions I've seen come through, because they lack a bit of what's the word? Oh, consistency. That's right.
and some people call it common sense as well.
Yeah, that's the other C word that goes in there. Yes, you're right. But it's just that they're trying to, in a lot of cases, if a matter's defended, they're trying to adjudicate on two competing sets of beliefs. I won't call them facts, I'll call them beliefs. And it's a matter of putting forward the strongest case that you can.
Exactly.
But I run a fair bit of training on VCAT and on legislation, what have you. One of the things I say to a lot of my training attendees is, don't be afraid of VCAT. Yes, the decisions are coming back to us, and they're weighted a little bit towards the consumer, but we are in a consumer society. What we've got to understand, though, is the VCAT member is not the natural predator of the property manager. They're not out for blood. They're making a decision based on the case that you put forward.
Correct. It's paramount that you prepare and present your case in the best possible way.
Oh, for sure. Yep, that's right.
Documentation and facts.
Yep.
The next question,
and your landlord expects it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where the knowledge and preparation comes in play. What do the rental minimum standards actually mean? We were talking about that before.
Well, we did touch on that. I think in the broadest sense, I mean that a property is safe and it's secure. And look, there are 14 minimum standards, and unfortunately, I was going to have them sitting on the screen beside me. I haven't got them sitting there, but look, it's to do with the safety of the property, the security of the property. It's got to be weatherproof. It's got to be draft proof. You've got to have hot and cold running water to the areas that require it. You've got to you've got to have what they call vermin-proof bins, which in a suburban setting we have. I mean, that's provided by council. That's not an issue. But the thing is also, one of the new standards that's come in is that we also have to have, and this came in 12 months ago, we have to have light excluding blinds and curtains on all habitable rooms, and habitable rooms in your bedrooms, your living areas. What's about to come in also in about 4 weeks' time, because we're recording this on the 1st of March, is a new set of electrical safety standards where every property has to be protected by residual current devices, which is the safety switch.
I've actually heard that from Gaslight.
Yeah, that's right. And you've got to have the switchboard to go with them. So there's a fair few that are being upgraded in that regard. And again, it's an expense. But once it's done, it's done. You don't have to then go back and redo it in 2 years' time or whatever, because it's then compliant with the current legislation. But they're the sorts of things that we need. The other one is you've got to have locks on windows, and which again goes to the safety of the property. That doesn't necessarily mean keyed locks. But what it means is the windows have to be able to be secured from the inside to stop people getting into the property.
Can they put the sticks? Can they put the sticks?
No, it doesn't count. Stop trying to find a way around it. Others have, and they haven't worked for them.
And I guess from the perspective of Victorian landlords or rental providers and the ones who are living interstate, VCAT and Magistrates Court, and I think that came in during the COVID time. And I remember we had some training in our office regarding the hearings at Magistrates Court as well. The applications are totally different to how you apply with VCAT. And of course, when it came in, everyone was panicking as if, and obviously we wanted to make sure that our applications are submitted correctly, and we should know beforehand what are we up for. And tell us a little bit more about VCAT and Magistrates Court and who actually has to apply with VCAT and or Magistrates Court.
All right. I think first thing, this all came about as a couple of High Court decisions that were actually not residential tenancies matter. They were both equal opportunities matters, where they found that, and they'd been referred to the High Court for adjudication because the other party, or one party or the other, was a resident interstate. So there's a gap in the Constitution, the federal Constitution, which was written, I don't know, 120 years ago, where and they didn't contemplate the amount of cross-border movement then as we have, but they then had the view that the resident of one state could not be subject to the jurisdiction of a tribunal in another.
Right.
So it means that if you're living in Victoria, you can't be subject to the the New South Wales tribunal system. But if you're living overseas, you can be. Or if you're living in one of the Australian territories, like the Australian Capital Territory, Canberra, or you're living in Northern Territory or Christmas Island, you are still subject to the workings of the tribunal in the state where the hearing is being applied for. If you're living interstate, and it doesn't matter whether it's a renter or the rental provider is living interstate, your avenue for adjudication is then the Magistrates Court. Because that's the body that has jurisdiction on residents of other states. It's a much more binding decision, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So,
and you just mentioned it's a rental provider or renter living interstate. I'm sure there would be a question asked, how can a renter live interstate while renting a property in Victoria, for example?
Okay, well, the renter themselves is living in Victoria. The jurisdiction would apply if they then moved out of the property and you were then, say, making a claim for compensation from the bond, for example.
Right.
And you're right. Look, that we had a period sort of thrown in with COVID, where for 18 months the resident, the interstate resident, and I'll call them rental providers at the moment because I'd say overwhelmingly that's where they are. But the rental providers that are living interstate had no support anywhere because the High Court decisions were handed down 2018 and then the beginning of 2020, February 2020 it actually was. And at that stage, all states just turned around and went, well, if you live interstate, we can't help you in our tribunal. I think Victoria was one of the last to bring in an amending act to give the jurisdiction to the Magistrates Court. But and that was the end of November 2021. So from pretty much, it was just under 2 years, from February 2020 through to November 2021, if you were living interstate, well, poor you. What they did though, was they made that act retroactive. So if anything had happened in that time, yes, it caused grief and concern and anxiety. But if anything had happened in that time that was still outstanding, you then had the right to make application for a hearing at the Magistrates Court to have the matter dealt with.
Wow, that's actually good.
Yeah. Look, it was a delay in the system. I think government recognised that it was a delay and thought, well, that's our solution. That's the only way that we're going to get around it.
Do you think it's fixed?
From a practitioner's point of view, yeah, look, I think that part of it's fixed. I like the decisions that are coming from Magistrates Court. I've got one to defend in about 10 days' time, actually, and I like the Magistrates Court, pardon me, because they are they're magistrates. They see from a position of the legislation, and they make decisions. In the main, they make their decisions based on the legislation.
Correct.
VCAT's got a different flavour to it. VCAT decisions are not necessarily made purely on the law. They'll be made on, we were talking about the reasonable proportionate test before. They'll be made on the basis of whether they believe that they can prevent someone being removed from a home when they could not, may find it difficult to find accommodation elsewhere, and the breach is of a relatively minor nature. If it's just persistent arrears, and if it's persistent arrears, I mean, my view is, and has been for quite some years, it's it's not a matter of capacity, it's a matter of will. Because if you're consistently paying your rent late and you're earning an income, it's a habit.
Correct.
And you're only doing it to be an annoyance. If you're genuinely in trouble, there are plenty of support mechanisms. And you'd have to also ask, if you're in a home that you're having trouble paying for, why are you still there? Because all it's doing is causing you stress.
Correct.
So common sense view, from my point of view, would be, well, find something that's more affordable. It may not be the area that you want to be in, or it may not be the complete type of accommodation that you're currently in, and that's causing you problems because there's a financial strain being placed on you.
And not only on yourself, and obviously rental provider and property manager at the same time as well. Stress, anxiety, and so many other things that come along.
That's right, exactly. And you've got to, I mean, look, and I think in the majority of cases, pardon me, I don't think many renters think much of the state of mind of the property manager. I think some of them have got some compassion for the property owner, but it's just you've just got to find a way to ease the burden on yourself. And I used that before very successfully in a number of tribunal hearings. Is that by allowing the continuation of the tenancy, all we're doing is we're causing the renter even more stress.
Correct.
Because they're obviously struggling to pay.
And that takes me back again to what I normally say. What I believe is, do your checks properly, market your property well, find the right tenant, assess the application really carefully. It's like you go in a nightclub. Once they let you in, you can create trouble. Be the bodyguard outside. Make sure you do the checks properly.
And we've got, I mean, look, as much as we've got legislation that prevents us delving too deeply from a privacy point of view, I think there's enough asked of a potential renter within the application itself for us to be able to form a pretty decent assessment. And social media is always good for being able to pick up who's going to be good and who's going to be trouble too.
you pick interesting stuff on the Facebook, LinkedIn's as well. I mean, if they're on LinkedIn, chances are that if they're on LinkedIn, chances are you're getting a good tenant or renter.
That's right. If they've got a LinkedIn profile, look, they're probably not a bad risk.
Exactly. It can be calculated risk.
Well, but everything is. That's the whole thing. This is what we've got to understand about rental properties from an ownership point of view. It's a risk. It's we look at it. We look at it as an investment. The tenant looks at it. The renter looks at it as a home. With that investment, from our perspective, there's going to be risk.
100%.
There's always risk. You can have a non-performing tenant. You could buy, maybe not the greatest of areas. There could be structural issues with the house that you didn't pick up when you went through, and then you'd ask, well, why didn't you build
the property or didn't maintain the issues?
That's right. Or the backside could fall out of the marketplace. I mean, there's risk. And I don't place any different weighting on that to say buying shares. Shares are a lot more volatile, but it's
Correct.
still the same thing. It's still risk, and you've got to understand that with that risk, you've got to be comfortable with it. With property, it's different again because you've always got expenses. You're always going to have, you've got your interest rates, bills, you've got rates, you've got insurances, you've got maintenance to the property, and you've got to keep the property properly maintained. If you don't keep it maintained, look, as much as you may not want to, you're actually costing yourself money.
Correct.
At the end of it, because you're not preserving the value of the property at the current market level. You let a fence go. Well, there's people are going to drive past and go, I'm not even going to look at that. The fence, it looks all shit. And they'll go and buy one 4 or 5.
Eventually, it affects the sale price when you decide to sell as well.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
I've seen a lot of people losing potential sale, or perhaps not being able to sell at all as well. Just because of the condition of the property, and you see versus a similar property has been rental as well, but just been looked after, has been sold for a fairly good price.
Yep, that's right. And I've seen countless properties like that where you've got landlords go, I'm not going to repaint the outside. It's just not worth it. It's only a rental. Well, you think, no, it's not. It's your investment. It's someone's home. It's your investment. And if you're not keeping it up, as you said, you're going to cost yourself money on the sale. But also equally, if you wanted to use that as collateral on another property to purchase another investment, you're going to find that the valuation on it will be, look, it might not be much, but it might be enough below what you want it to be to prevent you going ahead with the purchase. So penny wise and pound foolish, really.
Yeah. Great. It was lovely talking, Kirk. Thank you so much for joining the Jazz TV show today. And
you're welcome. Thank you again.
If someone wants to reach out from the industry, from property management industry, where can they contact you?
They can contact me either through the website, thepmcoach.com.au, or they can drop me an email, which is kirk@thepmcoach.com.au. They can call me on 0418 563 105. Or they can find me on social media. I'm all over Facebook. I'm all over LinkedIn, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram as well. I'm generally pretty easy for people to find. Really, and I'm 6 foot tall. I stand out in the crowd.
There we go. I've put in your website there.
Lovely. I just saw that come up on the ticket. Thank you. Yep.
There we go. Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Kirk. It was lovely having you on the show. And looking forward for our next show as well. And thank you so much for your time, and appreciate the input and obviously the knowledge that you've shared.
You're welcome. Happy to help.
Thank you so much for your time. You have a lovely evening. Thank you so much, Kirk.
Thanks, Les. All the best. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.